Marlon Brando wasn't just one of Hollywood's greatest actors, he was also one of its most feared. Behind the iconic performances and legendary charisma lay a man unafraid to speak his mind, reject co-stars, and even sabotage those he disliked. From feuds with fellow stars to petty personal grudges, Brando's list of rivals and enemies reads like a who's who of classic cinema. In this video, we're diving into the 7 actors Marlon Brando openly hated before his death, exploring the clashes, the insults, and the behind-the-scenes chaos that turned Hollywood sets into battlegrounds. Richard Harris. The tale of Richard Harris and Marlon Brando is a stunning example of admiration souring into bitterness. Harris, who would later become known to many as Dumbledore in Harry Potter, started out as a serious fan of Brando. He idolized Brando's acting, believing him to be a revolutionary force in film. When Harris got offered a role in Mutiny on the Bounty, he leapt at the chance, even though he didn't get top billing. To him, just working with Brando was a dream, but that excitement quickly evaporated once they reached Tahiti. On the remote set, Brando's behavior turned out to be wildly different from Harris's idealized image. He was habitually late, not just a little behind schedule, but routinely hours late. Cast and crew often waited under the blazing tropical sun while Brando floated in on his own timetable. Harris, fiercely professional and deeply committed to his craft, found this disrespect obvious and unforgivable. When Brando finally showed up, he frequently rewrote or changed lines mid-scene. He refused to stick to a script, improvising or asking others to adapt to him on the fly. That unpredictability drove Harris nuts. On top of all that, Brando rarely committed to memorizing his dialogue. According to reports, he used large cue cards placed around the set, reading from them when he felt like it and ignoring them otherwise. Harris and other actors came to believe that Brando's intense, far-off gaze, a trait of his later screen persona, was often just him reading his lines off those boards. Harris later revealed that this creative choice stripped away much of the mystique Brando had built around himself. What seemed like profound, introspective acting was, at times, no more than reading. For Harris, that wasn't artistry. It was laziness disguised as innovation. He felt betrayed by someone he had once held in the highest regard. Tensions came to a head during a fight scene. Brando's character, Fletcher Christian, was supposed to punch Harris's character, John Mills, but the blow Brando delivered was so weak it barely registered, more of a pat than a punch. Harris later mocked him, curtsying and wagging his wrist theatrically to underline just how unconvincing the scene felt. Brando didn't respond. The silent rejection pinched Harris deeply. Here was the man he once worshipped, refusing to fully commit to a basic physical moment. Beyond that, Brando appeared to run the production by his own whims. He treated the set like it revolved around him, altering shooting plans, delaying schedules, even rewriting the script while other actors were waiting. Director Louis Milestone and others later said Brando acted as though he was in control of everything, disregarding both cast and crew. Milestone described being reduced to a bystander. Either you watched Brando do his thing, or you walked away. Harris wasn't alone in his frustration. Other cast and crew members echoed similar complaints. Brando's disregard for schedule, his reliance on cue cards, and his frequent demands made the production notoriously difficult. Those problems weren't just personal, they impacted the whole movie. Mutiny on the Bounty nearly capsized, budget overran, morale dropped, and the film became a costly nightmare. To Harris, Brando's behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it felt selfish and self-indulgent. Here was a legend he'd once admired, the very icon who had reshaped acting, behaving like he didn't care about anyone else's work. Harris realized that Brando didn't value shared effort or discipline. He valued only himself. By the time filming wrapped, the bond Harris had once felt toward Brando was gone. Instead of hero worship, he was left with anger, disappointment, and a deep disillusionment. That man he once saw as infallible, he turned out to be deeply flawed, more concerned with his own comfort and control than with truth, craft, or collaboration. In the end, Harris admitted he saw something in Brando he couldn't ignore. The cost of brilliance when it isn't rooted in respect or humility. His admiration didn't disappear overnight, but Mutiny on the Bounty turned it into caution. And the lesson he walked away with was harsh. Even legends are human, and sometimes the greatest artists are their own worst enemies. Frank Sinatra. The rivalry between Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra during the filming of Guys and Dolls remains one of Hollywood's most infamous feuds, and it's easy to see why. By the time production started in 1955, both men were already legends, But they came into the project with very different backgrounds, very different egos, and very different approaches to work. The tension largely stemmed from casting. Sinatra had his eye on the leading man role, Sky Masterson, but the producers handed it to Brando instead. That casting decision was more than a professional slight, it was deeply personal. Sinatra not only felt he was bypassed, but he carried a lasting resentment, especially after he'd also missed out on another major Brando triumph, the lead in On the Waterfront. For Sinatra, watching Brando in the role he coveted was a wound that never quite healed. Once the cameras began rolling, the animosity quickly turned into psychological warfare. Sinatra preferred to bang out scenes in 1 or 2 takes, never wasting time. But Brando, he dragged things out, insisting on multiple takes until he felt something real was there. To Sinatra, Brando's method style was ridiculous, pretentious, and completely unnecessary. Their insults started early. According to set stories, Sinatra dubbed Brando Mumbles, a jab at his quiet, naturalistic delivery. That nickname stung. Brando retaliated not with glamour, but with tactics. In one now legendary scene, he deliberately flubbed his lines over and over so that Sinatra, in his character's diner, would be forced to eat slice after slice of cheesecake, something Sinatra reportedly hated. As the takes piled up, Sinatra grew ill from the constant cheesecakes, frustrating the whole cast and crew. But the feud didn't stop at insults and food torture. According to some accounts, things turned seriously dangerous. Brando's friend Carlo Fiore later claimed that Brando was abducted while riding his motorbike and threatened by 3 armed men. The implication was clear. These men were connected to Sinatra. Whether the claim was true or not, Brando took it seriously enough to hire a bodyguard for the rest of the shoot. On the set, director Joseph L. Mankiewicz often acted less like a creative visionary and more like a peacemaker. He struggled to contain both Brando's perfectionism and Sinatra's impatience. The tension was real. And yet, against all odds, the film was completed. The 2 stars shared only a handful of scenes, which probably helped the production survive. Their feud wasn't just about who got more lines or who got the laughs. It was a symbolic clash of 2 Hollywood eras. Sinatra represented the polished, professional old guard, someone who knew the ropes, delivered on time, and moved on. Brando embodied a newer breed of actor, raw, unpredictable, and fiercely committed to authenticity, even if it meant breaking rules. Despite all the conflict, Guys and Dolls was a success. But the anger lingered long after the credits rolled. Brando reportedly joked that when Sinatra died, he'd complained to God about being made bald. Sinatra, meanwhile, continued to mock Brando's method and even dismissed him publicly as the world's most overrated actor. What makes this feud unforgettable isn't just the verbal jabs or the endless cheesecake. It's how it exposed a deeper fault line in Hollywood, a battle between showmanship and substance. Sinatra saw Brando as defiant and undisciplined. Brando viewed Sinatra as shallow and egotistical. Their hatred was never just personal, it was ideological. In the end, they never reconciled. They made no more films together, and their interviews years later still crackled with tension. Their feud wasn't Hollywood fluff. It was real, sharp, and deeply rooted. And it remains one of the most brutal, fascinating rivalries in entertainment history. Burt Reynolds. If Brando's dislike for Sinatra grew from clashing styles and a bruised ego, his anger toward Burt Reynolds came from a deeper place. Brando didn't just think Reynolds was wrong for a part. He felt a sharp disgust toward him. People in the industry were shocked by how strong it was, even in a town used to big egos and loud fights. During the casting of The Godfather, that anger reached a peak. Reynolds was under serious review for the role of Michael Corleone before Al Pacino was chosen. His career was rising fast. He had charm, presence, and more range than many gave him credit for. Francis Ford Coppola saw the promise, and the studio liked the idea of putting a young star in a major role, but Brando wanted nothing to do with it. When he heard that Reynolds might play his on-screen son, he shut it down at once. He told the producers that he would quit the film if they brought Reynolds on board. And he didn't use polite language. He spoke in a way that showed how deep his dislike ran. According to accounts from people on the production, Brando said Reynolds made him feel sick. He called him the peak of something he found rotten in acting. He said Reynolds bowed to his own ego and treated the craft like a mirror instead of a tool. These weren't quick remarks made in a heated moment. They were harsh and deliberate, coming from a place far more emotional than simple disagreement. People started asking why Brando hated him so much. Some thought it was because they looked a bit alike. Both had dark hair and strong features. Both were leading men with broad appeal. Maybe Brando saw a version of himself he didn't want to face, a path he feared he might have taken if he chased fame instead of craft. Reynolds loved the spotlight. He smiled for the cameras, he did talk shows, he dated stars in full view of the public. He enjoyed the fun side of success, and he didn't hide it. To Brando, that was everything wrong with Hollywood. He believed it fed empty pride instead of real work. He saw Reynolds as someone who lived for attention, not truth. The strange part is that Brando often faced the same claims. People said he was self-centered and hard to deal with, but Brando saw a clear difference. He thought his behavior came from a fight for honesty in every scene. To him, Reynolds worked to protect a shiny image, and that image was the part Brando hated most. Brando had the final say on The Godfather, so Reynolds never got the role. Pacino stepped in, and the film became a landmark in movie history, but the rejection must have hit Reynolds hard. Losing the part was one thing. Hearing that Brando despised him on such a personal level was another. Being dismissed with such bitter words by an actor of Brando's weight had to leave a deep bruise. Brando's hatred for Reynolds wasn't a simple clash of styles. It came from a feeling that Reynolds stood for the very thing he spent his life pushing against. It was raw, sharp, and more personal than anything he showed toward Sinatra. Rod Steiger. Even two actors trained in the same craft aren't guaranteed harmony, and Rod Steiger's experience with Marlon Brando proves it. On paper, they should have been natural allies, both method-trained, both devoted to psychological realism, and both alumni of the actor's studio. Yet on the waterfront, Brando's unpredictable brilliance clashed with Steiger's meticulous precision, and what began as professional collaboration slowly soured into deep resentment. One of their most iconic moments is the taxi scene, when Brando's Terry Malloy delivers his heartbreaking line, "I could have been a contender," to Steiger's Charlie. That scene has become legendary, taught in acting classes, honored in cinema history, but Steiger remembered filming it as a moment of real pain. According to him, Brando wasn't fully present. While Steiger had prepared intensively for the role, studying the psychology of a man torn between criminal loyalty and family bonds, Brando was improvising, changing his approach from take to take, often on a whim. Steiger believed in the rigor of ensemble work, the kind of acting that lifts everyone in the scene, but Brando, in his eyes, leaned heavily on his star power. Rather than digging into the emotional texture of the moment, Brando relied on his natural charisma. The effect was destabilizing. Steiger felt he was constantly chasing Brando's shifts, forced to react to unplanned changes instead of creating a real conversation between the two characters. The tension ran deeper than just artistic process. By some accounts, Brando made it clear he viewed scenes primarily as vehicles for his own expression. He would leave the set immediately after finishing his close-ups, even when Steiger still had his own shots to do. Steiger later recalled that Brando walked out before Steiger's singles, leaving him to deliver his lines into the empty space, sometimes speaking to a stage manager rather than a scene partner. That absence to Steiger was more than just unprofessional. It was a wound. A sign that Brando didn't value him as an equal in their work. There was also a clash in how they viewed the profession. Steiger, despite being a star himself, carried a traditional and serious view of acting. He believed in research, in discipline, in commitment. Brando, after his meteoric rise, began to appear more erratic. According to critics and cast members, he drifted between deep preparation and offbeat improvisation, sometimes leaning into roles just for the paycheck. From Steiger's perspective, Brando wasn't just being maverick, he was being careless. Part of Steiger's disappointment stemmed from a sense of betrayal. Here was a man he once admired for reinventing acting, yet now he saw that same man sabotaging the very art he once loved. Steiger believed Brando had become complacent, even dismissive of the very craft that made him a legend. His commitment had shifted, and in Steiger's eyes, so had his integrity. Their falling out was gradual but absolute. Steiger rarely praised Brando as a person later in life, even if he acknowledged his talent. He remained measured but firm. Yes, Brando had lightning in his art, but personally? Not someone he could trust or respect fully. The friendship never blossomed, and the admiration was buried under a pile of resentment. In the end, their story is a reminder that great talent doesn't always mean a great relationship. Two method actors, both devoted to truth in performance, found themselves on opposite sides of the same scene. One clung to technique and ensemble spirit. The other rode his genius and his instincts, and in between them, the spark that should have ignited a powerful partnership ended up burning a bridge instead. Trevor Howard. Trevor Howard's dislike for Marlon Brando took root during the troubled production of Mutiny on the Bounty and never faded. Howard, cast as Captain Bligh opposite Brando's Fletcher Christian, came from a very different acting tradition. He was disciplined, technically precise, and deeply professional. For Howard, acting was a craft built on preparation, respect for the script, and commitment to fellow performers. Every scene was a shared responsibility, and every taken opportunity to honor the story. What he encountered on the Tahiti set was the opposite. From the very beginning, Brando's behavior disrupted the production. Mutiny on the Bounty became infamous in Hollywood for its chaos, repeated delays, ballooning costs, and a general sense of disorder. Much of this turmoil centered on Brando, whose behavior ranged from unpredictable to outright indulgent. He frequently arrived late, or sometimes not at all, forcing cast and crew to wait under the blazing tropical sun. For Howard, who had spent decades mastering his craft and respecting the demands of a professional set, this was more than frustrating. It was a violation of everything he believed acting required. When Brando did show up, he often had not learned his lines. He improvised or rewrote scenes on the spot, demanding that others adapt instantly. This unpredictability was particularly challenging for Howard, whose characters required precise delivery and a strong presence. Captain Bligh needed authority and discipline. Fletcher Christian required charisma and rebellion. On paper, the tension between these characters was compelling. In reality, Howard had to navigate Brando's whims, which made the work exhausting and often infuriating. Howard viewed Brando's approach not as artistic daring, but as self-indulgence. He believed Brando's reputation as a method actor was often a cover for laziness and ego. Reports from the set described Brando relying on cue cards placed around the set to remember his lines, a tactic that allowed him to appear thoughtful and absorbed while actually reading. To Howard, this behavior undermined the authenticity Brando claimed to champion. What the audience saw as intense, introspective acting was, in some cases, simply a man skimming his dialogue. The clash between British classical discipline and American method unpredictability was evident in every interaction. Howard believed in supporting the ensemble, in lifting the performances of everyone around him, and in treating the story as a collective endeavor. Brando, in Howard's eyes, treated each scene as a stage for his own genius, disregarding the impact on others. Scenes that were supposed to be collaborative explorations of character instead became exercises in managing Brando's whims. Howard was left frustrated and resentful, forced to respond to improvisations that destabilized the careful balance he had cultivated. Even the physical demands of the shoot highlighted their differences. While Howard endured heavy costumes and grueling shoots under the tropical sun, Brando often lingered in his trailer or socialized, leaving others to wait. Director Louis Milestone reportedly struggled to manage the production, caught between Brando's dominance and the expectations of a disciplined crew. To Howard, this highlighted a fundamental problem. Talent alone was not enough. Without professionalism, discipline, and respect for others, acting became selfish, not collaborative. Over time, Howard's view of Brando hardened. He acknowledged the American actor's brilliance, but saw it squandered through carelessness and ego. Brando had everything an actor could want: looks, skill, opportunity, but he often seemed content to coast. Howard, by contrast, remained committed to serious, challenging roles, upholding a standard of work that Brando increasingly disregarded. The contrast was painful to watch, a demonstration of wasted potential and unchecked privilege. By the end of filming, Howard's distaste was absolute. He never hid his opinion. Brando was talented but impossible, brilliant yet unprofessional. For Howard, the experience of Mutiny on the Bounty became a cautionary tale about ego, discipline, and respect on set. Even when paired with genius, a lack of professionalism could turn collaboration into chaos. The production left him with a lasting impression of Brando, not just as a difficult co-star, but as a cautionary example of what happens when raw talent is left unchecked. The story of Howard and Brando is a reminder that even shared skill or training cannot guarantee mutual respect. Two actors may be equally capable, yet fundamentally at odds in approach and philosophy. For Howard, the brilliance of Brando's craft could never outweigh the cost of his unpredictability, leaving a lasting mark on a career spent valuing discipline, preparation, and collaborative artistry. Audrey Hepburn. Some feuds are born of rivalry, others of pure disdain, and Marlon Brando's rejection of Audrey Hepburn falls squarely into the latter. While his clashes with Sinatra or Reynolds were fueled by ego and competition, his dismissal of Hepburn was rooted in unfiltered contempt. At one point, Brando was considered for the role of Pierre in a grand adaptation of Tolstoy's War and Peace, alongside Audrey Hepburn, who had been cast as Natasha Rostov. But Brando flatly refused the part, and not for scheduling reasons. He simply declared that he didn't think she was skilled enough to share the screen with him. This judgment stunned the film's producers. Hepburn was already among the most beloved and respected actors in the world, fresh off an Oscar win for Roman Holiday and widespread acclaim for Sabrina. Yet Brando seemed to think she wasn't worthy of him. According to production lore, he declined the role on grounds that cut deeper than mere artistic taste. He questioned her talent, undermined her ability, and essentially denied her professional legitimacy. Despite Brando's refusal, the filmmakers pressed on. They ultimately cast Henry Fonda as Pierre, even though he was considerably older than the character from Tolstoy's novel. They defended that decision in part because the other actors they considered, including Brando, declined. Brando's dismissal of Hepburn wasn't reported as a polite pass. His reputation and influence meant his refusal carried weight. He had the power to shift casting decisions simply by voicing his disdain. That moment exposed not just Brando's insecurity, but a layer of arrogance. Hepburn had earned her status. She was under contract for the film, had creative influence, and was deeply invested in the part. But Brando's assessment rejected her not just as a co-star. He rejected her as an artist. His contempt felt almost personal, a statement that he believed he was on a higher tier of talent and deserved only equals. For Hepburn, who had built her career on grace, discipline, and sincerity, this rejection must have been bruising. Brando's behavior fits a pattern also visible in other stories from his life. His harsh judgments, his unwillingness to humble himself even when faced with major stars. But with Hepburn, it was different because she represented a very different kind of performer. Elegant, restrained, emotionally honest. She was never showy. She didn't seek to dominate scenes with bombast. Brando, meanwhile, often placed himself at the center of a project, willing to walk away if things didn't match his vision. Turning down War and Peace because of Hepburn seemed less like a creative objection and more like an arrogant power play. On the flip side, the project moved forward without him. War and Peace was filmed with Hepburn still in the lead, and while it received mixed critical response, it did well, proving that she could carry a grand epic without Brando. She remained one of Hollywood's brightest stars, her reputation unshaken by Brando's refusal. Meanwhile, Brando's rejection became part of the legend around him, an anecdote told by insiders that speaks to his complicated relationship with other actors. So why was it cruel? Because Brando wasn't just declining to work with Hepburn, he was saying she didn't deserve to be cast beside him, as though her achievements, her skill, and her acclaim didn't matter. Her career was massive, her talent undeniable, but Brando's ego made him see her as beneath him. That level of disdain wasn't about art, it was about hierarchy, status, and control. In the end, Brando's rejection of Hepburn wasn't merely an anecdote about casting. It showed his capacity for personal and professional cruelty. He could champion method acting, recite praise for other icons, yet when it came to someone he felt challenged his own stature, he could be dismissive in public, and unrepentant. That moment revealed a man who believed deeply in his own greatness, but had little room for greatness in anyone else unless they were on his terms. Oscar Homolka. Even as a young actor, Marlon Brando had little patience for pretension, and his feud with Oscar Homolka shows just how personal his dislikes could get. This wasn't about ideology or fame. Brando simply found Homolka pompous and made it his mission to make him miserable. The battleground was Broadway during the original production of I Remember Mama, where Brando was making his stage debut in 1944. At that time, Homolka was a seasoned Austrian actor with a gravitas that came from years of work on European stages. He carried himself with a formal, old-world dignity that many admired, but Brando saw as arrogance. Homolka's manner was unflinching and self-important, and Brando, brash and rebellious, was immediately turned off. For him, there was no deeper philosophical fight, just a personality clash. Their tension came to blows in rehearsal and performance. Brando, never shy, decided to prank Homolka. One day during a scene, he waited for a moment when Homolka was supposed to blow a trumpet as part of his stage business. A simple, dignified action for the character. Brando sabotaged that moment, interfering in Homolka's performance in a way that was cruel, not clever, the kind of childish mischief born out of contempt rather than humor. Though Homolka had years of film and theater credits and even earned an Academy Award nomination later in life, Brando treated him as a target for personal torment. Homolka, serious and disciplined, represented precisely the kind of disciplined actor Brando felt was too straight-laced. Brando's attack wasn't about showing off his own talent, it was about putting Homolka in his place, reminding him, and perhaps reminding himself, who was in charge. This behavior may have seemed harmless to some, but it revealed something deeper about Brando's personality. He didn't just dislike Homolka, he actively sought to undermine him. Rather than simply avoid working together, Brando chose to embarrass him, disrupting the actor's performance in front of the entire cast. For Homolka, the experience must have been both baffling and humiliating. He came from a tradition of professionalism, a long-respected European theatrical career. Brando, on the other hand, was still rising, but already confident enough to pick fights for no reason. Their clash was not about art or prestige so much as ego. Brando's youthful defiance against Homolka's seasoned propriety. In retrospect, this feud is more than a footnote. It's a window into Brando's darker playfulness, his willingness to weaponize charm and spontaneity against someone he simply found irritating. It wasn't the grand battles of Hollywood stars. It was personal, small-scale, and entirely about Brando proving he wouldn't play nicely, even on Broadway. Marlon Brando's talent was undeniable, but his feuds and grudges show a side of Hollywood rarely seen. From artistic clashes to personal vendettas, his list of hated co-stars is as fascinating as his performances. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.